Welcome to Jennie Designs with Paper. This is Jennie. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. I have a card video for you tonight for those times when you need a really quick card. So I have this piece of floral pattern paper from Honeybee Stamps, and I found some scrap green cardstock or green pattern paper that is about the same color, and a kind of rusty coral color cardstock for the card base. This piece of cardstock is 4 1/4 inches wide by 11 inches tall, and I'm going to use my scoreboard and a bone folder to score that in half at 5.5 inches. That will create a top folding A2 sized card or a tent card. And the reason you would need to score your cardstock, especially when you're folding it in this direction, is that you are folding against the fibers of the paper and you don't want to cause them to crack or not fold nice and flat. Now, when I was folding this paper, I did not get my bottom corners lined up quite perfectly, so I just flipped it inside out and refolded and recreased that seam. I want to create a triptych with this floral pattern paper. You know, the triptych artwork where you have one image cut into 3 different pieces of art. That was kind of my idea behind this card. So I've taken this piece of floral pattern paper from Honeybee Stamps, and I've trimmed it down to 3 3/4 inches wide by 5 inches tall. The math is right. The order in which I cut the paper turned out to be wrong. I should have taken my green paper that I'm using for the mat and measured that first, because I did end up having to do some deconstruction to make it fit. So the next step I did was to take this 3 3/4 inch wide paper and cut it into 3 even strips. So I've got 3 pieces of paper that are 3 1/4 inch by 5 inches. And that's perfect. It still fits on the card front just fine. But then the mats. I created my mats to have more edge, more frame than there was space on the card front. So the first thing I did was then go and cut this green pattern paper to 5 1/8 inch and 1 3/8 inch, which then slightly makes that there's no room on the card, especially to leave any space. So once I started getting things figured out, I did have to kind of do some trimming, take things apart and do some trimming. Now I'm cutting down my 3rd piece of green paper, and this is leftover cardstock or pattern paper rather, from a Recollections pad that I purchased earlier this spring. So I want to make sure that when I place the pattern paper, the floral pattern paper, onto the card base, that I do it in the order that makes sense. I want it to look like it is one piece of art. That's why I've taken the time to kind of put it together and make sure I have each piece in the right direction. And here's where I realized that my mats are too wide. Yeah, they're hanging off the side of the card. So I stopped and took them apart and did some reconstruction and retrimming and put them back together. But then this meant I had to rearrange how they went. Now, the first one I want to apply is the one that goes into the middle. That way I know that there is even spacing on both sides. And I'm going to tell you right now, I did not use a ruler. I did not measure anything. I turned my card sideways and lined it up with the grids on my work surface. I'm using my new glass work surface here. And then I just centered that middle piece on the center line, the grid line that runs right through the middle of my card. And then I just kind of held it down, and looks like it needs to be shuffled down just a little bit. And as long as I eyeballed it so that it was in the middle of that line on the grid mat and at least visually centered between the top and the bottom, I was okay. Like I said, I'm not really one for always measuring. I'm okay with eyeballing. And then I can take the other 2 pieces, the left and right hand side, and add adhesive to the back of those papers and center them in between the pattern paper strip and the edge of the card. And I did leave a wider margin on the sides of the pattern paper than I did in between, and that's okay. As long as they're both that way, it looks very intentional. So now I have my triptych set up on my card front, and I had to stop and think about, okay, now what? What do I want to do now? I know this is going to be a birthday card. How do I want to put the sentiment on? So I decided to just put a sentiment right across the front, and I have pulled out this Stamp Abilities. It's just an all occasion stamp set, and it has a nice big happy birthday stamp. So I am going to place a piece of white cardstock. This is just scrap cardstock from my desk. It's probably Nina. It could be something else. And I'm going to use that happy birthday stamp and evergreen ink from Altenew, and I'm going to stamp this happy birthday sentiment. Now, the green in the pattern paper, it is kind of a evergreen, but it's very dulled down. There's lots of gray to it. And I didn't really have the exact ink color I would need to match that. So what I did was I stamped this 3 times with this evergreen ink to get it nice and deep, and it doesn't look black, but it is very definitely a dark green, and that layering of that ink allowed the color to become a closer match to the pattern paper that I'm using. I don't want to push too hard on the lid of my Misty. This is a thin type. I mean, it's nice and bold, but it is kind of a thin type, and I didn't want to smush the letters out. I didn't want it to look distorted or wonky, for lack of other word that comes to mind. And you can see as I am stamping it, it is getting a little bit darker and a little bit darker. And I was very satisfied after this third inking and stamping that it was the color I wanted it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off my stamp and put it away and move into the trimming and adhering of my sentiment. So I've pulled out my Fiskars trimmer, and I'm going to line that wire up just underneath the descenders and the ascenders of my sentiment, the parts of the letters that go up and down. I want this to be as thin as possible because while it is an important part of the card, and it will be the thing that you see first, I don't want it to be the most important part of the card. I want the pattern paper to stand out and the color combination to stand out. And because I have my trimmer out, I'm just going to use the trimmer to trim off the ends. I could have pulled out a pair of scissors, but hey, the trimmer's already out. Way off camera. Sorry about that. I need to matte this. And I went back and forth between using the green and using that kind of rusty coral color, the same as the cardstock. I opted to use the green pattern paper that I used to matte the floral paper on. Goodness sakes, if today has not been a tongue twister kind of a day, I feel like I can't get any of my words out. Because, words are hard. I had to say it one time. Okay, now that I have the sentiment matted, I can go ahead and trim down that mat. And I want a very narrow mat on the sentiment strip, the same as the narrow mat I put on the pattern paper to give it that framed triptych kind of look. I had to look up to make sure I was saying that word right because I was for sure that I was not pronouncing that correctly. I made Google tell me what it was called, and it's triptych. That's how Google said it. So if I sound weird, blame it on Google. Dude, I'm going to blame everything on Google. If I sound weird, I'm just going to blame it on Google. It's a perfect explanation. I am super pleased with this particular sentiment because it goes just barely wider than the panels of floral pattern paper that I put on the card. And so I feel like it's perfect. I am going to adhere this with a piece of foam tape. And I'm getting down to the very end of my Amazon 3M foam roll. I just got my new one in the mail or in my Amazon order this last week. So I am ready. I don't have to worry about running out. It's all good to go. I'm going to just kind of put this down in the bottom third of the card. And I'm going to make sure, again, eyeballing it to go straight across that card. And all that is left is to insert the copy paper panel on the inside of the card so that there is some place to write a birthday message for my sister-in-law. Super easy card. I know most of the time when we need quick cards, it's usually a sympathy card. And this could very easily have been a sympathy card. But I was pre-making birthday cards for the next month and thought this would be a perfect time to use pattern paper in this way for a video. So here's a little bit of a close-up so that you can see that skinny little mat and how pretty that pattern paper from Honeybee Stamps is. I really like it. It was a piece that came with an order that I made way back in the fall. So I wanted to thank you for stopping by my channel. Leave me a comment, leave me a thumbs up. Let me know how you feel about this particular type of card. I have a couple of other videos here for you to watch, as well as a subscribe button. If you have not yet already subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you did. And as always, I hope you have a really fabulous day.